The air in Phnom Penh doesn't just hang, it presses down, a thick, wet blanket woven from exhaust fumes, the sweet rot of overripe mangoes and something else, something ancient and tired. My name is Jack Riley. I'm a numbers guy. I fly into places the World Bank calls emerging markets and my firm calls high-risk, high-reward opportunities. I turn chaos into spreadsheets. I translate political instability into investment risk percentages. I thought I understood the game. I was a fool. The contract was for a major American infrastructure fund. They saw Cambodia as the next domino, a frontier market ripe for the picking. My job was simple: assess the landscape, identify the key players, grease the right wheels. And the biggest wheel of all was a man named Samdech Vorak. The press back home called him a strongman, a survivor, a relic of a darker time. In Cambodia, they called him father. They said it with a reverence that felt too heavy, too practiced. My first meeting was at his sprawling villa on the banks of the Tonle Sap. The gates were gilded iron, flanked by stone lions with unnervingly human eyes. Inside, the opulence was jarring. Italian marble floors, French antique furniture, and everywhere portraits of him. Vorak as a young soldier, thin and wiry. Vorak with foreign dignitaries, his smile a perfect, polished mask. Vorak with his family, his hand resting on the shoulder of his eldest son, a boy with his father's face but none of the fire in his eyes. He met me in a room lined with mahogany bookshelves. He was smaller than I expected, an old man in a silk shirt. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, but his eyes were like chips of obsidian. They didn't reflect the light. They swallowed it. He poured me a glass of whiskey that was older than my father. "Mr. Riley," he began, his English impeccable, a faint British accent clinging to the edges. "You Americans love stories, stories of redemption, of progress. You see our new skyscrapers, our bustling markets, and you see a story of a nation rising from the ashes." He took a slow sip. "It is a good story, a profitable one." I nodded, feeling the condensation on my glass. "We see potential, Samdech. We see a hard-working people in a strategic location. We believe in the future you're building." The words felt hollow as soon as I said them. They were lines from a brochure. He smiled, but it was a geometric exercise, a shifting of facial muscles that conveyed no warmth. "The future is a river, Mr. Riley. It can be diverted, it can be dammed. One must simply understand the currents." He leaned forward, the scent of old paper and something like dried flowers wafting from him. "And the most powerful current of all is loyalty. Without it, everything turns to mud." I left the villa feeling a strange chill, despite the searing afternoon heat. The word loyalty echoed in my head. It sounded less like a virtue and more like a threat. My local contact was a man named Piseth. He had been a professor at the university before the purges. Now he was a consultant, which meant he was a ghost, a man who knew everyone and was trusted by no one. He picked me up in a dented Toyota. The air conditioning was broken. "So you met the crocodile," he said, not looking at me. He navigated the chaotic traffic with a kind of weary resignation. "I'd say the meeting went well," I said, trying to sound confident. Piseth let out a short, bitter laugh. "Meetings with the crocodile always go well. He is a charming host. He feeds you well before he swallows you." He glanced at me, his eyes clouded with a sorrow so profound it felt like a part of the landscape. "He spoke of loyalty, didn't he?" I was taken aback. "Yes. How did you know?" "He always does. It is his favorite joke." Over the next few weeks, I tried to build my spreadsheets. I tried to make the numbers make sense. They wouldn't. I visited the sites of proposed projects, a deep water port funded by Chinese loans, a new smart city rising in the middle of a rice paddy. They were mirages. The port was half-finished, cranes rusting in the salty air, a ghost ship of concrete and steel. The smart city was a collection of empty, gleaming towers, their windows like dead eyes staring out at the jungle. It was a Potemkin village on a national scale, billions of dollars of debt, and nothing to show for it but hollow monuments to a future that would never arrive. I learned the word kaun meant debt, but it also meant a bond, a karmic tie. The country wasn't just in debt, it was ensnared. One evening, Piseth took me to a small, smoky bar near the old market, the kind of place where secrets were currency. He told me a story. not about politics, but about a fisherman who was saved from a storm by a great Naga, a serpent god from the river. The Naga sheltered him, fed him, and delivered him safely to shore. The fisherman promised eternal gratitude. But years later, a foreign merchant arrived, offering gold for the Naga's scales. The fisherman, forgetting his vow, showed the merchant where the Naga slept. "That is Vorak," Piseth whispered, his voice barely audible over the clinking glasses. Vietnam was his Naga. They saved him when his own brothers in the Khmer Rouge turned on each other in a storm of blood. They sheltered him, they trained him, they carried him back to Phnom Penh on their shoulders and placed him on the throne. They made him, and he promised them everything. He drew a wet circle on the table with his beer bottle. Then the merchants from the north came, from Beijing. They did not offer gold, they offered something better. They offered power without questions, money without morality. And Vorak, the grateful fisherman, he did not just show them where the Naga slept, he helped them sharpen the knife. I started seeing it. These silent political stabs the source material mentioned were not metaphors. I took a trip down to the border provinces near Vietnam. I saw the new concrete markers. They stood in the middle of rice fields that had belonged to Cambodian Vietnamese families for generations. They were planted silently in the night, inching the border forward, a slow, concrete cancer. The villagers spoke of it in hushed tones. They said the land was now haunted, that at night you could hear the earth groaning. It wasn't a land dispute, it was a desecration. Vorak was turning the country into a shield for China, a dead zone in the heart of ASEAN. I saw it at a regional economic forum in Siem Reap. The air was thick with diplomatic niceties, but when the discussion turned to the South China Sea, a chill descended. The Philippine delegate spoke with passion, the Vietnamese delegate with cold fury. They wanted a unified front, a clear message. The moment the Cambodian minister, a man who looked like Vorak's shadow, took the floor, the energy drained from the room. He spoke in circles, in platitudes. He mentioned cooperation. He mentioned peace. He avoided the name China as if it were a curse. He single-handedly gutted the joint statement. It was the first time in ASEAN history a communiqué had failed. I watched Vorak, who was observing from the back. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips. He hadn't just won a political victory, he had fed something. The despair and frustration in that room was a palpable thing, and he seemed to draw strength from it. It was a diplomatic shock, the news reports said, but it wasn't a shock. It was a ritual, an offering of discord to his new patrons. The betrayal wasn't just geopolitical, it was personal, it was intimate. The story of the Thai Prime Minister was a piece of local folklore among the expats, a cautionary tale. I met a jaded Australian journalist who told me the whole story. Vorak had hosted Yingluck Shinawatra, all smiles and hospitality. He had called her brother Thaksin, a fugitive from Thai justice, his eternal brother. He had made him a special advisor. It was a calculated insult to the Thai government, a slap, the journalist called it. But it was more than that. Days after Yingluck left, private photos appeared online. Not scandalous, but intimate. Photos of her in a hotel bedroom seemingly taken by a hidden camera. Then a private conversation was leaked where she spoke candidly about her distrust of the Thai military. It was a character assassination of the highest order. It wasn't politics, it was poison. It was designed to inflict maximum pain, to rub salt in unhealed political wounds. He doesn't just defeat his enemies, the journalist told me, swirling the ice in his gin. He humiliates them. He wants to own their shame. It's his drug. My own world started to fray at the edges. I began to feel watched. In my sterile, air-conditioned room at the Hyatt, I would hear things. A soft scratching from inside the walls. A whisper that sounded like my name, lost in the hum of the ventilation. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs, certain that someone was standing in the corner of the room. But there was never anyone there. I told myself it was the stress, the heat, the unfamiliar food, but a part of me knew it was something else. The country's sickness was leaking into me. I started digging into Vorak's consolidation of power. The dissolution of the opposition party, the CNRP, wasn't just a political maneuver, it was an eradication. Pisith, his voice low and trembling, told me what the official reports didn't. He told me about the midnight arrests, the parliamentarians who weren't just jailed but vanished. He showed me a grainy photo on his phone. It was of a well-known opposition leader, a man who had been educated at Harvard, a man who spoke of Jefferson and human rights. In the photo, he was kneeling in a field, his face a mask of terror. Behind him stood two men in plain clothes, their faces indistinct shadows. It was the last photo ever taken of him. "They talk about a pro-government Supreme Court dissolving the party," Pisith said, his finger shaking as he swiped the photo away. "That is the story for your newspapers. The reality is a knock on the door at 3 a.m. The reality is a black van with no license plates. The reality is that we have new killing fields, smaller, quieter, but just as hungry." The independent media was strangled. Radio stations were shut down. Newspapers were bought by Vorak's cronies. NGOs were expelled. Facebook, which had once been a vibrant space for dissent, became a minefield of government trolls and spies. Civil society wasn't just crushed, it was atomized. People became afraid to talk to their neighbors. The web of community, of trust, was systematically unraveled, leaving only isolated, fearful individuals. And at the center of this web of silence sat the spider, Samdech Vorak. Democracy, I realized, had been nothing more than a costume, a thin veneer he wore for 2 decades to get what he wanted. Development aid, international legitimacy, a seat at the table. Once his power was absolute, once the secret deals with Beijing were signed, the costume was torn off and thrown on the fire. When Western ambassadors complained about human rights, he laughed in their faces. He called it hypocritical interference. He didn't need their paltry aid anymore. He had a new benefactor, one who didn't care about the inconvenient fiction of a free press or fair elections. My spreadsheets were a joke, a testament to my own Western naivete. I was trying to measure a cancer with a ruler. I was trying to chart the movements of a ghost with a stock market ticker. One night, I couldn't sleep. The whispering from the walls was louder. It was a chorus now. I went to the window and looked out at the city. The new skyscrapers, funded by Chinese debt, were lit up, piercing the darkness like sterile needles. But below them, the city was dark. The real Phnom Penh was shrouded in shadow, and in that moment, looking down, I understood. The skyscrapers weren't a sign of progress. They were tombstones. They were monuments to a nation that had been sold, soul and all, by one man. For power. For survival. The true horror wasn't the ghosts in the walls, it was the man in the villa. The man who had taken an entire country with its 17 million souls and turned it into a prison of fear and silence. He hadn't just betrayed his allies, he had betrayed his own people. He had betrayed the very idea of a future. I started having a recurring nightmare. I am in a vast, dark field, under a moonless sky. The ground is soft and wet. I realize it is not mud, it is flesh. A heaving, breathing mass of bodies all intertwined. The victims of the Khmer Rouge, the disappeared opposition members, the betrayed allies. They are all here, a single, suffering organism. And standing on a small island of dry land in the middle of this sea of bodies is Vorak. He is not gloating, he is simply watching, tending to his garden of sorrow. He looks at me, and his eyes are not angry, they are hungry. He raises a hand and points, not at me, but at a space right beside him, a space reserved for someone new. I would wake up screaming, the sheets tangled around me like a shroud. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place a few months later. It was announced with great fanfare. Samdech Vorak, after more than 38 years of selfless service to the nation, was stepping down. He was handing the reins to a new generation. There was talk of modernization, of a peaceful transition. It was a lie. He wasn't retiring, he was ascending. The new prime minister was his son, Hun Manet, in the source text. Here, he was Vorak Manet, a man with a Western military education from West Point, a PhD in economics from Bristol. On paper, he was the perfect modern leader. In person, he was a hollow man. I saw him at the ceremony. He stood beside his father wearing a crisp suit, his face a blank slate. He recited his acceptance speech, but the words were his father's. The cadence was his father's. He was a puppet, and everyone knew it. The strings were held by the old man who stood beside him, beaming like a proud father but whose eyes held the cold satisfaction of a king securing his dynasty. It wasn't a transition of power, it was an inheritance. This wasn't a constitutional nation, it was a family company, a feudal state disguised in the ill-fitting clothes of a republic. Vorak Mane didn't just inherit the title of prime minister, he inherited the military, the police, the state-owned enterprises, the entire network of patronage and fear that his father had spent 4 decades building. The fate of 17 million people, decided not by a ballot box but by a bloodline. Pizeth and I met one last time. We sat in a deserted cafe, the fan on the ceiling stirring the thick, hot air. He looked older, thinner. The spark of defiance in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, bottomless exhaustion. "It is finished," he said, staring into his empty coffee cup. Democracy was a slogan. Power is the only reality, and power is inherited, like a family curse. He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw real fear in his face. Not for himself, for me. "You should go home, Mr. Riley. Your spreadsheets mean nothing here. Your numbers are an illusion. This place is not governed by economics. It is governed by something much, much older." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice a whisper. He leaned across the table. "During the Khmer Rouge, during the years of fire and blood, this land was soaked in despair, in betrayal. Brother turned against brother. Children were taught to murder their parents. An ocean of suffering. Such things, they do not just go away, they leave a stain. They create an appetite. They awaken things that were sleeping." His eyes were wide, staring at something over my shoulder. "Vorak did not just survive the killing fields, he made a pact there. In the heart of the darkness, he made a bargain. His life, his power, in exchange for feeding it. He has to keep feeding it. Betrayal is not his weakness, it is his sacrament, the failure of ASEAN, the humiliation of his rivals, the crushing of his own people. They are not political acts. They are offerings. He is the high priest of a forgotten god, and the entire country is his altar." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was insane, and yet it made a terrifying kind of sense. It was the only explanation that fit all the pieces. The casual cruelty, the insatiable hunger for control, the way he seemed to thrive on the misery of others. He wasn't just an authoritarian, he was a parasite, and his host was Cambodia itself. "Go home," Pizeth repeated, his voice cracking, "before it decides it is hungry for a new kind of offering." That night, my hotel room was broken into. Not a clumsy burglary, a professional search. My laptop was opened, my files copied, my papers were rifled through, then put back in a deliberately messy way. A clear message. They knew I was digging. I was no longer an analyst. I was a liability. The friendly smiles of the government officials I met now seemed like the bared teeth of wolves. The city, once just a challenging assignment, now felt like a cage, and the bars were closing in. I called the American embassy. A weary political officer listened to my story with practiced patience. He told me to be careful. He suggested it might be best if I concluded my business and returned home. There was no offer of help, no outrage, just a tired acknowledgement of the reality on the ground. "We have strategic interests," he said without saying it. "We can't afford to upset the crocodile over one analyst." I was on my own. Panic, cold and sharp, set in. I had to get out. I booked a flight for the next morning. I packed a single bag, leaving my suits and reports behind. They belonged to a different person, a naive man who was now gone forever. I spent the night sitting on my bed, staring at the door, listening to the whispers in the walls. They were clearer now. They weren't just random sounds, they were voices. The voice of the vanished opposition leader, the voice of the betrayed Thai prime minister, the voices of a million ghosts, all whispering a single name, Vorak. My last call was to Pizeth, to warn him, to thank him. The line was dead. I tried his other number. Disconnected. I felt a pit of ice form in my stomach. An offering. The word echoed in my mind. The drive to the airport was a journey through a landscape of fear. Every pair of eyes in the passing tuk-tuks felt like they were watching me. Every police officer on the corner seemed to be looking for my face. The city's oppressive heat felt like the breath of a predator on my neck. At the check-in counter, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my passport. The agent, a young woman with a polite, empty smile, took an unusually long time. She kept glancing from my face to her screen, then back again. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears. This is it, I thought. The black van is waiting outside. Then, with a click of her keyboard, she printed my boarding pass. "Enjoy your flight, sir," she said, her smile never wavering. I walked towards immigration, my legs feeling like lead. I didn't dare look back. I felt a presence behind me, a cold spot in the warm, humid air of the terminal. I could feel his eyes on me. Vorak. He wasn't there in person, but his will was everywhere, a palpable force field of malice that covered the entire country. He was letting me go. He knew he had already won. He had planted a seed of his horror in my mind, a little piece of the killing fields that I would carry with me forever. Killing me would be a crude, simple act. Breaking me, letting me live with what I now knew was a far more exquisite cruelty. As the plane lifted off the runway, I looked down at Cambodia one last time. It didn't look like a country. It looked like a corpse. The gleaming Chinese projects were the work of a mortician dressing up the dead for a funeral no one would attend. The Mekong River snaked through the land not like an artery of life, but like a dark, sluggish vein filled with poisoned blood. The sources I had read described a Cambodia that was isolated, fractured, and lacking strategic direction, an economy in a debt spiral, a nation with no true allies. I had seen the evidence, the hollowed-out economy, the alienated ASEAN partners, the scorned Western nations. Even China, I suspected, did not trust Vorak. They used him, they owned him, but trust a creature whose very nature is betrayal? Never. He had built his kingdom on treachery, and now he was king of a wasteland of his own making, a ruined legacy. But the true horror story wasn't in the geopolitical analysis. It was in the silence of the people, in the fear in Piseth's eyes, in the hungry ghosts that whispered from the walls. Vorak's legacy wasn't a fractured state, it was a haunted house, 17 million square kilometers large, and he had passed the keys to his hollow son, ensuring the ghosts would never rest. I landed at JFK 22 hours later. The cold, crisp New York air was a shock. The noise, the energy, the sheer chaotic freedom of it all should have been a relief. It wasn't. It felt thin, brittle, a fragile illusion. I went back to my clean, quiet apartment in Brooklyn. I tried to write my report. I typed words like political risk, debt trap diplomacy, authoritarian consolidation. The words were meaningless. They were like trying to describe a shark attack by analyzing the water temperature. Weeks turned into months. I quit my job. I couldn't look at a spreadsheet without seeing the faces of the disappeared. I couldn't sit in a silent room without hearing the whispers. The horror had followed me home. It wasn't just in Cambodia. It was a truth about the world, a dark undercurrent beneath the surface of things. The truth that power, absolute power, is a carnivorous entity. And it doesn't matter if the altar is a Mayan temple, a Nazi gas chamber, or a quiet, beautiful country in Southeast Asia. The appetite is the same. Sometimes late at night, I walk through the city. I see the faces of the powerful here. The politicians with their polished smiles. The billionaires with their dead eyes. And I see him. I see Vorak. I see the same geometric smile, the same void that swallows the light. I understand that he is not an anomaly. He is just a purer, more honest expression of the pact, the bargain made in darkness for a throne of bones. The final question in the source material I read was whether Cambodia could still correct its course, or if it was lost. That question misses the point. The horror is not whether Cambodia is lost. The horror is that Cambodia is a mirror. Tonight the city is quiet. The hum of the traffic is a distant lullaby. I stand in my bathroom staring at my reflection in the mirror. My face is pale. My eyes are wide. I look tired. I look haunted. And for a terrifying split second, the face looking back at me is not my own. The eyes are not my eyes. They are chips of obsidian. They are hungry. And a voice, a whisper from the deepest part of my own mind asks a simple question: what will you betray to survive?